The judge had not even finished clearing his throat when my husband stood up. Grant Carter did not wait for permission. He never did. He straightened his expensive suit, smiled like this was a party he had already won, and spoke loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. "You'll never get a cent of my money again." The words hit the room like a slap. A few people gasped. Someone whispered. I felt every eye turn toward me, waiting to see me break. I didn't. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap, my nails pressing gently into my skin. My heart was beating fast, but I kept my face calm. I had learned that silence scared people more than tears. Beside Grant, Celine Brooks leaned back in her chair. She crossed her legs slowly and smiled at me. Not a kind smile, not even a polite one. It was sharp, like she was enjoying a game. "He's right, sweetheart," she said, tilting her head. "You should have thought about that before." Grant laughed softly. It was the same laugh he used at home when he locked the bedroom door and told me the house was his, when he said the bank accounts were his, when he said I was nothing without him. The judge raised a hand. "Enough," Judge Halvorsen said. His voice was deep and steady. He had gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every lie a person could tell. He was not smiling. He never did. I looked around the courtroom. The walls were tall and pale. The benches were hard wood. The air felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. Lawyers sat with files stacked high. Strangers sat in the back, watching a marriage end like it was a show. At the table beside me sat my lawyer, Mrs. Wilkes. She was calm, her pen resting neatly on her notebook. She did not look at Grant. She did not look at Celine. She looked at me. I nodded once. Slowly, I reached into my bag. My fingers touched the envelope. It was plain. No name written on it. Just sealed tight. I handed it to Mrs. Wilkes without a word. She stood and walked it to the judge. Grant noticed. "What's that?" he asked. His smile still there, but thinner now. Judge Halvorsen took the envelope. He did not answer Grant. He opened it carefully and pulled out the letter inside. The room went quiet. You could hear papers moving. You could hear someone cough in the back. The judge began to read. At first, nothing changed. Grant leaned back again, crossing his arms. Celine looked bored. His lawyer, Mr. Alden, flipped through his notes like this was just another easy win. I watched the judge's face. His eyes moved left to right. His brow lowered just a little. He turned the page. 1 minute passed, then another. Grant shifted in his chair. "What is this about?" Mr. Alden asked. The judge held up a finger. Silence. I stared at the floor, counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3. Then it happened. Judge Halvorsen laughed. Not a small laugh. Not a polite one. A real laugh that filled the courtroom. People gasped again. Louder this time. Someone dropped a pen. Mr. Alden froze. Celine's smile vanished like it had never been there. Grant stood halfway up from his chair. "Your Honor?" he said, confused. "What's so funny?" The judge looked up slowly. His eyes locked on Grant. "Checkmate," he said. The word landed heavy. Grant's face changed. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked around, as if someone would explain it to him. Celine leaned toward him. "Grant?" she whispered. The judge placed the letter on the desk in front of him. "I will be asking a few questions," Judge Halvorsen said, "and I suggest you answer them carefully." Grant swallowed. "This is ridiculous," Mr. Alden said quickly. "We've already established—" "Sit down," the judge said. Mr. Alden sat. I finally looked up. Grant's eyes met mine. For the first time that day, he did not look sure. The canned, ADR, creator. Only 2 years earlier, he had looked very sure of everything. I remembered our wedding day. Grant had stood tall, smiling for pictures, telling everyone how lucky he was. He loved to be admired, loved to be seen as the perfect man. At first, he was. He bought gifts. He planned trips. He spoke kindly in front of others, but money was always there. Between us, over us. He paid for everything, and he reminded me of it. "You don't need to worry about finances," he used to say. "That's my job." Then it became, "You wouldn't understand this." Then, "You should be grateful." When I asked to see the bank account once, he laughed. "Why?" he said. "You don't earn it." The room felt smaller now as the judge adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you claimed under oath that all marital assets were disclosed. Is that correct?" Grant nodded quickly. "Yes, of course." The judge tapped the letter. "And yet this document lists accounts and properties that were not included." Grant frowned. "That's impossible." "Is it?" the judge asked calmly. Mr. Alden leaned in to whisper to Grant. Celine stared at the letter like it might bite her. I thought about all the nights I lay awake while Grant slept, about the times he talked too much after drinking, about the emails he left open, about the documents he thought I could not read. I had never screamed. I had never accused. I had watched. "Your Honor," Mr. Alden said, standing again, "my client has explained that those transfers were—" "After the marriage," the judge interrupted, "and during active proceedings." Mr. Alden stopped speaking. Grant's jaw tightened. "This is being taken out of context." "Then explain the context," the judge said. Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Celine grabbed his arm. "Say something," she whispered. He pulled away from her. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Carter," he said, turning to me, "you have been very quiet during these proceedings." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "Why?" I stood. My legs felt weak, but my voice did not. "Because I didn't need to speak," I said simply. Grant laughed nervously. "She's playing games." The judge did not look at him. "She provided a letter," Judge Halvorsen said, "with dates, copies, and records. Clear and organized." He paused. "Very clear." The courtroom felt different now. People leaned forward. Even the strangers in the back were listening closely. Celine's face had gone pale. "This isn't fair," she muttered. The judge heard her. "This court is not concerned with fairness to third parties," he said. Grant stood up fully now. "This is my money." The judge's voice grew sharp. "Sit down, Mr. Carter." Grant sat. I watched his hands. They were shaking. For years, those hands held the keys, the cards, the power. Now they were empty. Judge Halvorsen gathered the papers neatly. "This court will take a short recess," he said, "after which we will continue." He looked at Grant one last time. "And I suggest," he added, "you prepare for consequences." The gavel struck. People began to whisper loudly. Lawyers spoke in fast voices. Celine stood and walked away from Grant without looking at him. I sat back down. Mrs. Wilkes leaned toward me. "You did well," she said quietly. I nodded. I did not smile. Not yet. Because this was not about winning. This was about the truth finally being seen. Before the courtroom, before the letter, before Grant stood up and said I was broke. There was a time when I believed my marriage was safe. Grant Carter knew how to make people feel chosen. When he asked me to marry him, he made it sound like a promise and a gift at the same time. He said he would take care of everything so I would never have to worry. And at first, he did. He paid the bills. He planned trips. He told people I was lucky. Everyone believed him. I did too. When we moved into the big house with white walls and tall windows, Grant said, "This is our future." I smiled and said thank you. I did not notice then how often he said my instead of our. My house, my money, my rules. The first time I asked about our bank account, it was small and simple. I had gone shopping for groceries and my card did not work. The cashier smiled politely and asked if I had another one. I felt embarrassed. I paid with cash and went home confused. That night, I asked Grant. "Oh, that," he said, waving his hand. "Just a security thing. I'll fix it." He kissed my forehead and turned on the TV. I let it go. The second time, the card stopped working again. This time, Grant laughed. "Why do you even need it?" he asked. "I handle the money. That's how marriages work." I felt silly for asking. I told myself he was right. Slowly, little things changed. If I wanted to buy something, I had to ask. If I wanted to visit my sister, I had to explain why. If I stayed out too long, he asked questions. Not angry questions, calm ones. The kind that made me feel like I had done something wrong even when I hadn't. Then Selena appeared. At first, she was just a name Grant mentioned at work. Then she became a friend. Then she became someone who called too often. One night, I saw a message pop up on his phone while he was in the shower. "Can't wait to see you again." I did not scream. I did not throw the phone. I waited. When I asked him about her, he didn't deny it. "You should be grateful," he said. "Men like me have options." That was the night I stopped trying to be heard. The divorce started quickly after that. Grant moved fast. Faster than I expected. He hired an expensive lawyer and filed papers before I even understood what was happening. Within days, my cards stopped working completely. I tried to withdraw cash. Denied. I called the bank. They told me my access had been removed. When I told Grant, he smiled. "I told you," he said. "You don't earn it." I moved into a small apartment with borrowed furniture. I wore the same clothes again and again. I learned how quiet poverty could be. But while Grant thought I was falling apart, something else was happening. I was paying attention. Grant liked to talk, especially when he thought I wasn't listening. He talked about investments while brushing his teeth. He complained about taxes while eating dinner. He argued on the phone and forgot I was in the room. I learned words I had never cared about before. Transfers, holdings, shell accounts. Once, I noticed a folder left open on his laptop. I didn't touch it. I just read the titles. Dates mattered. Names mattered. When the divorce hearings began, Grant acted like a king. In court, he spoke with confidence. He said I contributed nothing. He said I depended on him for everything. Celine sat beside him, dressed well, smiling at the right moments. She looked at me like I was already gone. People believed them. Why wouldn't they? I had no money, no loud voice, no power, but I had memory. At night, I wrote things down. Not feelings, facts. Dates Grant came home late. Things he said about moving money. Names he used and forgot he had used. When I met Mrs. Wilkes, she didn't rush me. She didn't interrupt. She let me speak slowly. "You've been observing," she said after our second meeting. "Yes," I replied. She nodded. "That matters." Grant's lawyer, Mr. Alden, tried to crush us early. "You'll walk away with nothing," he said once, smiling politely. "Be reasonable." I almost believed him. Almost. But then I remembered Grant's confidence. How sure he was that I knew nothing. And that made me wonder why. One afternoon, while cleaning out old boxes, I found copies of papers Grant had once asked me to sign. I remembered how rushed he was that day, how he told me not to read them. I read them now. The dates didn't match the story he was telling the court. That was when I stopped feeling afraid. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn him. I kept collecting pieces. Emails, old statements, notes written in my quiet handwriting. Each piece alone meant little. Together, they told a story. As the final hearing approached, Grant grew louder. He told friends I was trying to steal from him. He told Celine the judge was on his side. He told me, during one last meeting, that I would regret not settling. "You'll leave with nothing," he said again. "Not 1 cent." I looked at him and said nothing. That night, I sat at my small table with the papers spread out around me. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. I wrote the letter slowly. Plain words. No emotion. Just truth. I sealed it. Not to hurt him, but to stop him. Because power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. The letter did not begin with anger. It did not begin with tears, or blame, or long stories about how much I had suffered. It began with dates. I remember sitting at the small table in my apartment, the one with a leg that wobbled if I leaned too hard on it. The light above me flickered softly. Outside, cars passed. People lived their lives, and no one knew what I was doing. I lined the papers neatly. Not because I wanted them to look nice, but because order mattered. For so long, my life with Grant had been loud on the outside and messy on the inside. I had learned that noise hides things. Silence reveals them. I started with the earliest memory. The night Grant came home late and complained about moving money before it caused problems. I wrote down the date. I matched it with a bank statement I had found weeks later in an old folder. Then the next moment, the phone call he took on the balcony. The one where he laughed and said, "She has no idea." I remembered how cold the air was that night. I remembered the month. Every memory led to another piece of paper. It felt like building a bridge from small, forgotten moments to something solid. I did not rush. I had learned patience from being ignored. Mrs. Wilkes had warned me not to bring everything into court too soon. "Let them believe what they want," she said. "Confidence makes people careless." She was right. Grant was careless. He believed I was weak because I was quiet. He believed silence meant emptiness. He believed tears were the only weapon a woman could have. He never noticed that I stopped crying long ago. Each time we went to court before the final hearing, Grant performed. He spoke clearly. He smiled at the judge. He acted like a man who had nothing to hide. Celine watched him with pride. She squeezed his hand when he spoke. She whispered things that made him grin. I watched them too. I noticed how Grant corrected his lawyer once without thinking. I noticed how Celine sometimes looked away when money was mentioned, like she was afraid of hearing something she didn't want to understand. They thought I was watching because I was jealous. I was watching because I was learning. One afternoon, while waiting outside the courtroom, Grant walked past me without stopping. "You could end this," he said over his shoulder. "Be smart." I looked up at him. "I am?" I said. He laughed and kept walking. That night, I added another line to the letter. Not about what he said, but about the confidence with which he said it. Confidence leaves fingerprints. As the pages grew, I realized something important. This was not just about money. It was about control. Grant had controlled every part of our life by deciding what I was allowed to know. He told me stories and expected me to believe them because he said them loudly. But stories break when facts line up. I wrote the letter in simple language. Short sentences, clear points. I did not accuse. I presented. I imagined the judge reading it alone, without Grant's voice filling the room. I imagined the silence. One evening, Celine called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "You should stop this," she said without greeting me. "Stop what?" I asked. She sighed like I was a child. "Trying to take what isn't yours." I smiled softly, though she couldn't see it. "I'm not taking anything," I said. "I'm just telling the truth." She was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. "You really think anyone will listen to you?" The call ended. I wrote down the time. I added it to the letter not as drama, but as proof of pressure. Days before the final hearing, Grant's lawyer sent an offer. It was small, almost insulting. Mrs. Wilkes slid it across the table toward me. "They think you're desperate," she said. I pushed it back. "No," I replied. "They think I'm done." That night, I reread the letter one last time. I checked every date, every number, every connection. Not once did I ask myself if Grant would be angry. I only asked if it was true. When the answer stayed yes, I folded the pages carefully and placed them into the envelope. I did not write my name on the front. I sealed it and placed it inside my bag. I slept better that night than I had in months. The morning of the hearing, I dressed simply. No jewelry, no bright colors, nothing to distract. I watched Grant arrive with Celine, laughing, confident, already celebrating. He looked at me like someone looks at an old receipt, something used, something thrown away. I felt calm. When we took our seats, I did not look at him again. The judge began the hearing like any other. Dry words, legal steps. Grant spoke when asked. He told his story again. Celine smiled again. When it was time for closing remarks, Grant stood before anyone asked him to. That was when he said it. That I would never get a cent of his money again. I did not react, because my part had already been written. When Selene added her cruel little sentence, I felt nothing. Not pain, not fear, only certainty. I reached into my bag. The envelope was still there, heavy, with truth. I handed it to Mrs. Wilkes. She did not ask what was inside. She simply stood and passed it forward. When the judge opened it, I kept my eyes on my hands. I did not need to see his face to know something had changed. The laugh came later, but the silence before it, that was the moment I knew. Not because Grant was afraid, but because, for the first time, he did not understand what was happening. And that was the power he never thought I would have. The laughter did not last long. Judge Halvorsen stopped smiling almost as quickly as it appeared. He placed the letter down carefully, like it was something fragile and dangerous at the same time. The courtroom was silent. Not the calm kind of silence. The heavy kind. The kind that presses on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Grant shifted in his chair. He tried to smile again, but his mouth would not listen. Celine leaned closer to him, her voice low and tight. "What's happening?" she whispered. Grant did not answer. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the papers again. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I will ask you a few questions. Answer them clearly." Grant nodded. "Of course." "On March 12th of last year," the judge continued, "did you authorize a transfer from a joint account into a private holding account?" Grant blinked. "Just once." "Yes," he said. "That was before the separation." The judge did not react. "And on April 3rd, he said, did you transfer ownership of a property listed as marital property to a company under a different name?" Grant's lawyer, Mr. Alden, stood up quickly. "Your Honor, these questions—" "Sit down," the judge said. Mr. Alden sat. Grant swallowed. "That property was never fully marital," he said. "It was complicated." "Complicated does not mean undisclosed," the judge replied. I watched Grant's hands again. They were gripping the edge of the table now. The judge turned a page in the letter. "This document," he said, tapping the paper, "connects multiple actions over time. Actions that suggest intent." Grant laughed, but the sound was wrong. Thin, empty. "Intent?" he said. "To protect myself? That's not illegal." The judge looked up. "Lying under oath is." Celine straightened in her seat. "That's not fair," she said suddenly. "He worked for that money." The judge looked at her for the first time. "Ma'am," he said, "you are not a party to this case." Her face flushed. She opened her mouth again, but Mr. Alden touched her arm. She pulled away from him sharply. I stayed still. Mrs. Wilkes leaned slightly toward me. "It's unfolding," she whispered. I nodded. Grant leaned forward now, his voice louder. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's twisting things. She doesn't even understand finance." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And yet," he said calmly, "the records are accurate." Grant froze. The judge continued. "The letter includes transaction numbers, timelines, and documentation that matches what this court has on record." He paused, "which suggests careful observation." Grant turned to look at me. Really look at me. For the first time in years, his eyes were searching instead of judging. "What did you do?" he asked. I met his gaze. "I paid attention," I said. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he said, "this court will now review additional materials." He signaled to the clerk. Documents were brought forward. Thick folders. More than one. Mr. Alden stood again, panic creeping into his voice. "Your Honor, this will take time. We request." "You will have time," the judge said. "You will not interrupt." Grant leaned back slowly, like the strength had drained from him. Celine stood up. "I need air," she said. "No," Mr. Alden hissed. "Sit down." She sat, but her knee bounced under the table. As the judge read, the room changed. People leaned forward. Lawyers whispered. A few heads shook. The story was no longer simple. No longer about a rich man and a quiet wife. It was about patterns, choices, and consequences. The judge began speaking again. "These transfers occurred after marital conflict began," he said. "Some during legal consultation." Grant shook his head. "That doesn't mean—" "It means," the judge interrupted, "that assets were moved in anticipation of divorce." Mr. Alden closed his eyes briefly. Celine whispered again. "You said this was handled." Grant snapped at her. "Be quiet." She stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. The judge leaned back in his chair. "This court will take a brief recess," he announced. "I will return shortly." The gavel struck. The room exploded into sound. Lawyers rushed to corners. Phones came out. Voices rose. Grant stood and turned to Mr. Alden. "Fix this," he said sharply. "That's what I pay you for." Mr. Alden's face was pale. "You should have told me about those accounts." Celine stood between them. "You told me everything was clean," she said to Grant. "It is," he snapped. "She's lying." But his voice shook. I remained seated. Mrs. Wilkes did not leave my side. "You're doing well," she said again. "I know," I replied. Across the room, Celine grabbed her purse. "This is not what I signed up for," she said. Grant reached for her arm. She pulled away. "You said she was nothing," Celine whispered. "You said she had no power." Grant didn't answer. The judge returned sooner than expected. Everyone rushed back to their seats. Judge Halvorsen looked serious now. No humor, no warmth. "I have reviewed the additional documentation," he said, "and I have concerns." Grant straightened. "Significant concerns," the judge continued. He looked directly at Grant. "You presented this court with incomplete financial disclosure." Grant shook his head. "That's not true." The judge held up a document. "This is a property transfer dated 2 weeks before your filing," he said. "It was not disclosed." Another page. "This account was opened under a related entity during the marriage." Another. "This signature does not match the timeline you provided." Each page felt like a weight added to the room. Celine's breathing grew fast. She stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. Mr. Alden tried one last time. "Your Honor, intent must be proven." The judge nodded. "And it is." Grant stood abruptly. "This is a trap," he shouted. "She planned this." The judge's voice dropped. "Sit. Down." Grant sat. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "you demonstrated restraint throughout these proceedings." I nodded. "You did not interrupt. You did not provoke. You waited." He paused. "That matters." Grant looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't. The judge continued. "Because of the evidence presented, this court will reassess asset division." Celine's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" she asked. The judge did not answer her. He looked at Grant. "It means," he said, "that your confidence may have been premature." A murmur moved through the courtroom. Grant slumped slightly in his chair. I felt something then. Not joy. Relief? For the first time, the truth was louder than him. Judge Halvorsen gathered the papers and placed them neatly together. "We will proceed carefully," he said, "but understand this. Deception carries consequences. He looked at me once more. You may remain seated, he said gently. I did. Grant stared at the table. Celine stared at the door. And the room. The same room where he once stood and said I would get nothing. Now felt like a place where power had quietly changed hands. The courtroom felt smaller than before, not because the walls moved, but because Grant Carter no longer filled the space with his voice. He sat hunched now, staring at the table as if the wood might give him answers. Judge Halvorsen adjusted the papers one final time. This court is ready to rule, he said. The words cut through the room like a blade. Everyone straightened. Grant lifted his head slowly. Celine reached for his hand out of habit, then stopped halfway, unsure. Her fingers curled back into her lap. The judge began calmly, the way people do when something serious is coming. Divorce cases often involve anger, he said. They involve pain, pride, and power. But this case involves something more troubling. Grant's jaw tightened. This court has reviewed financial records, testimony, and written evidence, the judge continued. What stands out is not one mistake, but a pattern. He held up the letter. This document did not shout. It did not accuse loudly. It simply told the truth. The judge looked directly at Grant. And the truth is, Mr. Carter, you attempted to hide marital assets. A ripple moved through the room. Celine inhaled sharply. That is a serious violation, Judge Halvorsen went on. Not just of trust, but of law. Grant stood up again, desperate now. I worked for that money, he said. She didn't do anything. The judge raised a hand. She did something, he said. She paid attention. Grant froze. For years, the judge continued. This court believes Mrs. Carter was led to believe she had no voice, no access, no understanding. He paused. And yet, she observed everything. I felt every word settle inside me. Because of the deliberate deception uncovered, the judge said, this court orders a full reassessment of asset division. Celine whispered. No. Judge Halvorsen did not look at her. All hidden assets will be disclosed, he said. Penalties will apply, and the distribution will reflect not only contribution, but conduct. Grant's lawyer sank back into his chair. Grant shook his head again and again. This isn't happening, he muttered. It is, the judge replied. He turned toward me. Mrs. Carter, he said, your patience and restraint have been noted. I stood. I did not smile. I did not cry. I simply stood. You were underestimated, the judge said. That was not your failure. He brought the gavel down once. The sound echoed. It is the ruling of this court, Judge Halvorsen said clearly, that Mrs. Carter is entitled to a revised settlement reflecting full disclosure, penalties, and legal costs. Grant staggered back into his chair. Celine stood abruptly. This is insane, she said. You can't punish him like this. The judge finally looked at her. Ma'am, he said firmly, you are dismissed. She stared, stunned. Now, he added. She looked at Grant. He did not look back. Celine gathered her things with shaking hands and walked out of the courtroom, heels clicking loudly. The door closed behind her with a sound that felt final. Grant was alone. The man who once laughed and said I would never get a cent of his money again now sat silent, his shoulders heavy. The judge leaned back. One final thing, he said. Grant looked up weakly. This court does not reward cruelty, Judge Halvorsen said. It corrects it. He picked up the letter one last time. When I read this, he said, I laughed. Grant flinched. Not because it was funny, the judge added, but because it was precise. He looked directly at Grant. It was checkmate. The gavel struck again. The hearing was over. People stood. Papers shuffled. Conversations started. I stayed where I was for a moment. Mrs. Wilkes leaned toward me, her voice warm. "It's done," she said. I nodded. Across the room, Grant stood slowly. He looked smaller now, older. The confidence that once wrapped around him like armor was gone. He walked past me. For a second, he stopped. "This isn't fair," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I know," I replied. "You're not used to that." He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. He walked away. Outside the courtroom, sunlight poured through tall windows. People hurried by, each carrying their own story, their own fight. I stepped into the light. For years, Grant told me money was power. He was wrong. Attention was power. Patience was power. Truth was power. I did not walk out rich in joy or loud victory. I walked out free. And that was worth more than every cent he tried to keep from me. The doors of the courthouse closed behind me, and for the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders lifted. Not all at once. Of course, freedom doesn't arrive like a parade with trumpets. It starts quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a breath you've been holding for too long. Outside, the air was crisp and smelled faintly of winter. People walked past, busy in their own lives, oblivious to the storm that had just ended inside those walls. I felt almost invisible. And yet, for the first time, I understood that invisibility can be a shield. It had been my shield for years, and now it was my armor. I let myself take it in. The sun was low, casting long shadows on the pavement. It was beautiful in a way I hadn't noticed in years, not because I was paying attention to the sun itself, but because I could finally pay attention to myself. I thought about the letter, the careful, precise collection of facts, dates, and truths that had made a man who thought he was untouchable finally falter. It hadn't been written in anger, not in the heat of revenge. It had been written with clarity, patience, and a kind of quiet power that comes from being underestimated for too long. Grant had believed that control was all about money, about showing dominance. He had believed that my silence was weakness. Selene had believed the same thing, and that had been their mistake. True power, I realized, wasn't loud. It wasn't brash. It wasn't about the thrill of humiliation or the flash of wealth. True power was preparation, observation, and the courage to act when the moment was right. That's why, even when Grant had laughed at me, even when Selene had mocked me, I had been waiting. And in the courtroom, when Judge Halvorsen read the letter, that quiet strength had become louder than any threat, any boast, any accusation. I walked along the sidewalk, feeling the chill in my cheeks. I didn't know where I would go next. The divorce settlement would ensure I could live comfortably, but that was not the point anymore. Money had never been my goal. Freedom was. Autonomy. The ability to make decisions for myself without fear, without needing anyone's permission. My phone buzzed in my bag. It was Mrs. Wilkes. "I just wanted to say congratulations," she said softly. "You handled everything perfectly. No one could have done it better." "Thank you," I replied. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." She chuckled. "You don't need me. You've always known what to do. You just had to be patient enough to wait for the right moment." I smiled faintly. Patience was never my strength, but silence worked. We hung up. I started walking again, and for the first time in years, I felt the world open before me. I passed a small cafe and noticed a mother holding her child's hand. I noticed a young couple laughing as they shared coffee. I noticed the warmth of strangers moving through their own lives, oblivious to my small triumph. It occurred to me then that life doesn't stop when pain ends. It doesn't wait for justice to be served. Life moves forward, and if you let it, it can be beautiful again. I remembered the years with Grant. The nights I spent lying awake, listening to him speak, trying to memorize every detail of his life because he thought I wasn't paying attention. The months I lived without money, without independence, feeling powerless but watching, always watching. And now, That watching had become a weapon, not for revenge, but for survival, for truth. I reached my small apartment and paused at the door. Inside, it looked exactly the same as the last night I had packed my belongings. But it didn't feel the same. That apartment, once a symbol of restriction and struggle, now felt like the starting point of something entirely new. I unpacked a few things slowly. I didn't need much. I had the essentials: my journal, a few photographs, and the memories that no one could take from me. And that was enough. I sat at the small table and opened my journal. I wrote, not about Grant, not about Celine, not about the courtroom. I wrote about me. About the first time I felt control of my own life again. About the first day I breathed freely without fear of someone else's anger. About the small victories that no one would notice but me. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower and the apartment filled with long shadows. I did not notice time. I did not notice hunger or tiredness. I only noticed the quiet strength that had taken root inside me. For the first time, I made plans, not plans dictated by someone else's rules, but plans for me. Plans for learning, for exploring, for creating. Plans that involved no one but myself, yet that left me open to the world. That night, I slept soundly. Not the restless sleep of fear or anger, but deep and restorative. I dreamed of open skies, of roads that led to places I had never been, and of a future that was mine to shape. The next morning, I woke early. The light came in pale and golden through the windows. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching people move through the city, carrying their lives with them, unaware that mine had changed forever. I thought about Grant one last time, not with hate, not with bitterness, but with understanding. He had believed he could define my life because he controlled the money, the environment, and the narrative. He had been wrong. He had underestimated the quiet resolve of a person who has nothing to lose and everything to observe. Selene would never understand, of course. She had only ever seen the surface. But that didn't matter. The only validation I needed had been in the courtroom, in the judge's words, in the envelope that contained the proof of my patience, my attention, my resolve. I made another note in my journal. Not about victory, not about revenge, but about freedom. About how it feels to stand upright in your own life after being pushed down for years. About how silence can be louder than screams, and truth sharper than weapons. I knew there would be challenges ahead. Life is never perfectly easy after betrayal or injustice. But for the first time, I faced those challenges on my own terms. I was the one writing the rules now. Weeks later, I took a walk in the park. Children ran past, dogs barked, leaves blew in the wind. I smiled quietly at the simplicity of it all. I realized that joy doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It can simply exist, quietly, alongside freedom. I stopped by a bench and sat. For a long time, I just breathed, feeling the warmth of sunlight on my face. I thought about the courtroom one last time, about Grant's expression, about the judge's words, about the quiet but undeniable victory of patience and clarity. And then I laughed softly. Not at him, not at Celine, not at the past, but at the beauty of knowing that I could finally live without fear, without manipulation, without a single person telling me what I could or could not do. That was the true ending. Not money, not revenge, not public humiliation, freedom. And it was sweeter than anything else I could have imagined. I stood, dusted off my coat, and walked forward. The world was waiting, and this time, I was walking into it on my own terms. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more interesting revenge stories.